Yeah, we were talking about your work on the Carol Burnett show, and you mentioned a few of the sketches that you wrote. Are there any others that stand out in your mind?
One stands out because it was almost a disaster. It was the fifth year. It was the year we came back to quotes produce the show, and we hadn't been doing much writing. And usually, whatever we did on a Monday made it to the screen on a Friday. But every once in a while, there would be a sketch that just didn't work. And sometimes you knew it early, and sometimes Carol would say, well, let me try to make it come alive. Well, every once in a while, there'd be something that just didn't work. And everybody knew it, and who was going to bell the cat, you know. We used to have a sketch we used to have a bulletin board with the list of the sketch. And there was a sketch called Anthony the Wonder Ant, which never made it to air. But every year that card used to go up there. And then we'd say, are we desperate enough to call on Anthony the One? No, let's think of something else. Well, anyway, this was like the day before air. And this sketch was just not working. And the guest was Carl Reiner. And so I was one of the producers, quotes, that year. And I said, all right, let me go home and try and write something within that time frame that'll fill that spot, and we can just get rid of it. And it has to be real simple. It has to be practically no scenery, no costumes, and just easy to pick up and learn. And so I was thinking, and I said, why not do a sketch with Carol and Harvey and Carl, and we'll just do it like a writer, because I'm sitting here in front of my IBM Selectric 2. Let the writer be sitting there, and he's writing a mystery story. And let him write, and as he's writing, let us see just against the cyc in the background, two people acting out what he's writing. Except that he will change his mind in the middle as they're acting it out. And so maybe, some funny stuff will happen. So we set it up, and I get Harvey as the writer and Carol as the gangster's moll and Carl as the gangster type who she's in love with. And so I write out the sketch that night, and I get it to Carol. And there's a lot of business going on in the sketch, but nothing that's really too difficult to do. There's a gun going off, and a stabbing, and a smoking of a cigarette, and the exchange of smoke as they kiss each other and stuff like that. And so I give the sketch to Carol that afternoon. And she reads, she says, oh, this is funny. I think we can make this work. And I said, oh, great, great. So they start rehearsing the thing. Now, the one thing I had forgotten was that Carol, for the longest time, had been a smoker. And not only was she a smoker, but she had tried to quit on numerous occasions and went back to it. And she was on a run now of about 6 weeks without a cigarette. And one of the key elements in this wonderful sketch was she lights up a cigarette. She takes a long drag on it. And while Harvey's thinking, the smoke is still in her lungs. And he says, she leans over and kisses Carl. And meanwhile, she has the smoke in her mouth. And then they do the action. And by the time Harvey decides, they part. And the smoke, of course, comes out of Carl's mouth. And so I realized that the lady has been trying to quit smoking. And here I'm writing a scene where she takes the smoke in her lungs and holds it. And I said, oh, if I'm responsible for her going back to smoking because of this stupid sketch, I feel terrible. So I said, Carol, how do you feel? She says, I feel good. I said, wait a minute, how good do you feel? She says, it's funny, it's good, let's do it. Don't worry about it, let's do it. And she did it. She did the sketch. We did it that night. It was hilarious. They were all wonderful. And thank goodness she never went back to smoking again. But it scared the hell out of me when I thought I'm going to be responsible for this. And that's the story.
Were there any sketches that you wanted to do that you didn't have a chance to do, that you couldn't do for some reason?
Not that I recall. No, we pretty much had a free hand to do whatever we wanted. We did a whole thing. It just occurred to me the other day. See, the real sad thing about it, and I've never gotten the answer to this, the first 5 years of the show have never been repeated. All you see in the reruns and the specials and the packages of the Carol Burnett show are the last 5 years, the last 6 years. And nobody ever ran or even reran those first 5 years. I've heard a number of reasons why. I don't believe any of them. And there was some brilliant gems in those first 5 years, and people that, Lana Turner and Rita Hayworth and Jimmy Stewart and people like that, and the original Jackson 5. There were a lot of great things that Carol has copies of them, I don't even know if the museum has copies or if the Academy has copies. But those, when I wanted a copy of the Fun Family, I'd call Carol and she'd run off a copy for me from her, whatever she had. But they've never been packaged, they've never been rerun, they've never been seen, and it was just, that's a big heartache of mine, because I think you're missing a lot of great stuff that she did in the earlier days that nobody remembers, or if they remember, they haven't seen, So that's that story.
Were there any guest stars that were your favorite during that period?
I loved, like I say, Marilyn Horne and Eileen Farrell and the Three Little Pigs. They were fun. Mickey Rooney was delightful on the Fun Family. Mel Torme was brilliant in that other sketch, Pots and Pans it was called. There were two songwriters, Phoebe Potts and Tommy Pans, and they were Pots and Pans, and they had a songwriting team together until Nanette Fabre came in and broke them up. No, just everybody came to that show with such good feelings, And there were people who just did so well there, like Steve Lawrence. Steve was a good, solid, he was a Harvey Korman with a voice, I mean, he could really do anything. And he was a wonderful sketch performer. And of course, he sang great. And Edie was terrific. When Carol would do these musical sketches, she would hold her own with the best of them, with Lena Horne and Ella Fitzgerald and whoever was on. Carol didn't have to worry. She worried, but she didn't have to, because she carried her end vocally and musically, and if she wasn't quite sure, she'd make a face, and it was all right. So, but everybody, you would go on that show knowing you were going to be treated well, you were going to get the best material to do, you were going to be comfortable, and you'll be out by 9 o'clock on a Friday night. I mean, who could ask for anything more?
So why did you leave?
We left because it was a chance to be head writers on another show. We were not the head writers on Carol. And it was a bump in salary, and it was a chance to work with somebody. Pearl Bailey that's why we left, to do Pearl. And it turned out to be a mistake, but it was a good mistake because we were able to come back and with a greater appreciation of Carol and how terrific it was to be there, to work with those people. Yeah.
And then you left again after a year?
Yes, because that was the end of my partnership. And there was a question of this other writing team, as I told you about earlier, and us, and there was a conflict, and there was no resolution to the conflict. And so Joe, in his probably infinite wisdom, let us both go and hired Ed Simmons to be the head writer. And he brought back the two friends of Carol, the Welches, to do special music material, who would work with her back on Gary Moore and even before that. So we were, the four of us were out, and shortly thereafter, my partner, Bill, went into another direction. He was going to save the world, and I was going to pay the mortgage. So we went different directions. And I was a solo act after that. And
What up to that point, what made that partnership work?
we had known each other since high school, freshmen in high school. Bill was a very creative, happy guy. He was a wonderful social person, loved to schmooze. He was a wonderful front for the team. He didn't mind doing all the things that I minded doing. He was also single at the time, and so had much more freedom to spend time and go around and do other things. Everybody loved Billy, and so it saved me a lot of effort on things that I didn't enjoy doing, you know. He was also very helpful, very creative, and he would write lyrics, and we would work together on things, and all the sketches that we did were mostly done together. Sometimes I would go off and do something alone, but for the most part, it was hum and strum working together. So that was how it went. But towards the end, we just had different approaches to what was important in life, and we went our separate ways, and it really opened up for me a whole different world when I had to do a lot of those things that I didn't particularly enjoy doing, but I learned to do them. And one of the most important things, I guess, was to convince people that I didn't have to sit in their office to create, you know. I could sit here in my underwear and turn out just as good as if I was wearing pants in your office, you know. But that took a while because people say, I'm paying your paycheck, I want to see your face. And I said, all you have to see is my material. You don't have to see my face, much as you like to see it and how gorgeous it is. All you need is what I can deliver for you. And if I stop delivering, then I'll come to your office. So getting a setup like this took many, many years to convince people.
Did it get easier as technology changed and there were faxes?
Well, I tell you, I used to use either a yellow pad, a legal pad, or an IBM Selectric typewriter. And I've got 3 of them sitting in my closet right there. I fought the use of a computer because anything, and I went to the Bronx High School of Science, mind you, but I fought anything technological because it's too much work to learn something new. I know how to change a ribbon. That's about as far technically as I can get. So I used to just work on my IBM Selectric. I learned how to use and get a fax machine. One of the producers gave me one, so I wouldn't have to go to the office and deliver it, or he didn't have to spend money on a messenger. So the fax I could work, I knew how to work the typewriter, I knew how to push a pencil, and that was all I needed to know until the point where everybody and his brother was using a computer. And it was got to be so ridiculously difficult when I do shows in Washington or in New York or other places on the road, and I'd say, or the PA knew to get me an IBM Selectric 2. And they say, what's that? Well, it's the precursor of the computer, you know. And so nobody had them anymore. They couldn't even rent a typewriter where I was going. So perforce, I had to learn, I was perforced to learn how to use a computer, at least in its basic form, to do Microsoft Word. And gradually I became more and more dependent on it and saw the value of it, and it was that's what I use now.
Did it change your process, the way you?
My process. I don't. It was easier to work somewhere. I have a laptop. I can go and sit outside and use the laptop. It's hard to schlep the IBM, which weighs about 20 pounds, and so in that sense, I had more freedom to work. I had more communication. I had more source material to draw from the computer. Just go to Google, and there you are, And that, to me, is so fascinating. I mean, now the kids buy me toys and tchotchkes, I got an iPhone, I got an iPad, I got I don't know what. And although I start out not knowing anything, little by little they give me apps and things, and I was talking, my grandson's living with us this week because his parents are on vacation, and he had to start school. So my wife drives him to school in the morning. So, and he's a whiz, like all the kids, they know everything on the computer. So I've been talking to his parents who are up in Mount Shasta on my iPad, face to face with them. Amazing, it's really, that's terrific, So I can appreciate the 21st century, even though I got one leg in the 20th. That's how, but as far as actually, it's still a blank page, when you sit down and somebody says, we need this by Thursday, you're looking at a blank screen instead of a piece of paper, but it's still blank till you put something on it, But the great thing is, like, if you want to make a change, you don't have to go back to page 1 and scratch it out and do a whole new page. You just delete and erase and you got, it's there. So.
Do you think people's expectations have changed in terms of deadlines, that they think you can write faster now? Or
no, because most of the people don't know what it was like. They have no basis to compare it to. My daughter, created the Weeds. That's her show. 7 years already. Wonderful, wonderful. My daughter, that's all she ever did was work on a computer, Still got her old discs hanging around the house. And my son, who created Will and Grace, that was his show. They work on a computer all the time, and nobody there, knows pretty well what a typewriter is. My wife, who is a novelist, or was a novelist, decided when the kids went off to nursery school that she's got to do something in the 6 weeks that they're away. And she decided to write a novel. And so she wrote a novel, sitting on the bed with the legal pad, and every day she would scribble a chapter. And if you want to know what terror is, come home after working and your wife says, I want you to read this. And if it ain't good, what do you say? Fortunately, it was brilliant. I mean, it was so good. I felt, I was looking forward to coming home and reading what she did that day. In 6 weeks, she wrote a whole novel. She had it published. Harper and Row published it. Streisand was going to make a movie out of it. She wrote a second novel. Jack Clayton, who did Room at the Top, the director, made her do a screenplay for him. And so, but that was all pencil, and number 2, Eberhard Faber, and a yellow pad, and that's your scratch. And then you call the secretary to type it up or whatever. And that's how we worked. That was the way. So she doesn't like the computer. She stopped writing at the drop of a breakfast. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But was a terrific writer too,
I can actually take you back now to
Sure.
Your solo career, when that started, and how you were able to. Well, first of all, did you have trouble because you were a partnership? Did you have trouble then going off on your own in terms of people thinking that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do what you did as a partnership?
I think the perception in the industry was that I was capable of doing the work. And one of the first jobs I had when I went solo was for someone I had worked with many, many years ago, Gary Smith and Dwight Hemian of Smith Hemian, who do the best variety shows ever. And so the first job I got by myself was an Anne Margaret special in London. And it was 1975, and I had to go there. And in those days, you'd spend 5 weeks on a special. 5 weeks. And the guest was, God help us, Sid Caesar, who was drying out at the time and had some problems. And he was there for 5 weeks with us. And Anne Margaret was just, she's a terrific lady and also a wonderful heart. And so, but I was in London for 5 weeks doing that special, and it came out really well. So that reestablished me. And the very next thing I did for Smith Hemian was America Salutes Richard Rodgers. And that I won a solo Emmy for that. I'd gotten an Emmy for the Carol Burnett Show, one of the 5 years. And so that was a solo Emmy. And so that established me like, it's Emmy quality. We can hire him and save half the money. So it wasn't that hard making the adjustment, really.
So let's talk about some of those projects. The Beatles at Shea Stadium, was that done at that time?
No, that was done before. That was
before?
1964, I think. Beatles at Shea Stadium. That was interesting. We were working for Ed Sullivan, for Sullivan Productions. We had done a summer show. The first one was Al Hurt, I think. We did the trumpet player. He had a summer show, and we were producer-writers on that with Bob Precht, who was Ed Sullivan's son-in-law, but also the producer of The Sullivan Show. I think it was 13 weeks we did that. And then Ed Sullivan got the Beatles on his show, and it was a huge coup. And at the time that he made the deal for them to appear on the show, he knew that they were going to do a concert at Shea Stadium, and he also got the rights to the Beatles at Shea Stadium. And we had worked with Precht, and he said, "Look, guys, I'd like you to work on this Beatles at Shea Stadium special." And we said, "Great." So once again, it was the kind of thing where I'd send my partner out to Shea Stadium while I stayed home and changed diapers with the kids. But anyway, he went out to Shea Stadium, and fortunately, Bob Precht said, just as a backup, let us tape our own mics to the mic stands because you never know what's going to happen. And if they hadn't have done that and got a direct feed, you would have heard just screaming from first note to last note. That's all you heard in Shea Stadium were young girls screaming and yelling, and you couldn't hear a note of music. But we had it on our own separate Nagra there. So what happened was, comes back from the thing and say, well, how was it? And Billy says, well, it was great, except, I don't know what we have on tape, but do you know how much time the Beatles did? I said, well, they did the concert in Shea Stadium, and we sold an hour space. He said they did 22 minutes total. From first note to last. They did like 5 songs and left in an ambulance. And I said, well, Bob Precht sold the 1 hour special, the Beatles at Shea. So he said, well, we better do something. So we found this kid, or somebody found this disc jockey down in Miami, a kid. And Bob Precht got a hold of him and gave him a Nagra tape recorder and said, you go, the rest of the trip where the Beatles are going, you go with them and you ask them any question that pops in your head. And you turn that Nagra on and you take the answer down. And you come back with all those audio tapes and bring them back to New York when they're finished the tour. And we'll build a show. And that's what happened. The kid went and he asked, what color's your underwear? Whatever he asked him. We're never going to use the question. We only used the answers. And we always use the answers in a way that they never fit the question. It just fit the footage we had of the Beatles at the Warwick Hotel and getting in the limo and going into the airport and the helicopter and the shots in the backstage dressing room. And whenever the Beatles said anything, we just found a voiceover line from Milwaukee where he said, my underwear is blue. I said, okay, we can use that here because he's changing his... So we built that show from the audio tapes that we had, plus the 22 minutes of the concert footage, plus the sound that we got off our own speakers, plus the opening act, Mary Wells and King somebody who played the saxophone. And we built that 1 hour show out of 22 minutes of the Beatles at Shea Stadium.
Okay, going forward, you work with Bette Midler on her special.
Yes, old red hair is back. Bette is a consummate performer. She knows her audience. She knows her strengths. She knows, I don't want to say limitations because I'm pretty sure she doesn't think she has any. But she also, like anybody else in the business, has certain people she trusts, certain people she's worked with over the years. And when you have that, you don't really want anybody else foisted on you. And I guess I was a foistee because it was Smith-Hemian doing the directing and producing, and I was their writer. And so I worked on the show. I worked with Bette. I worked with the people that she worked with, Bruce Valanche and a few other writers that she had. I didn't have that much input when the show won an Emmy for her. I don't think she mentioned me. However, it was a lovely show. A strange show in terms of Dustin Hoffman was the guest. And at least I didn't pull my Rock Hudson pin like, here's a scale, because Dustin Hoffman plays the piano quite well. And he played for Bette with her and everything. But to me, the highlight of that show, and Dwight, nobody shoots a show like Dwight. And the lighting man was from England, a fellow named John Rook. John is just, you don't know where they see these things, where they got the eye. But their pictures are just works of art. And she did a number with Emmett Kelly, the clown, the sad clown, Emmett Kelly, sitting on a park bench. And she's singing a song called Hello in There. Tear your heart out. He doesn't break a smile. He just sits there, and she tells a story about a woman who had a fried egg on her head, and it was a Bette Midler story from her act or something. And then she went into this song. If you look at that and you say, God, let's put a frame around it and put it in the museum. It's just gorgeous and very moving. And that to me was, you know, she could do the other stuff and the funny. We opened up with, she sang Oklahoma in a Hawaiian, at a luau with a Hawaiian skirt and all the Hawaiian dances. And she's singing Oklahoma. So that was typical of, you know, the Bette Midler humor, but she can pull it off, and she's still pulling it off, you know.
How about Cher?
Cher, I did did 2 specials with Cher, I think. Also, someone guts, amazing guts. Yes, meet with her, I think it was Art Fisher he died in a helicopter crash. Good director, good creative director. And we'd meet with Bette, and she had notions about what's right for her, what's good for her, what's daring for her. And also, you know, she had Bob Mackie, too, to do the costumes. And Cher said, you know what I'd like to do? I said, what? She said, West Side Story. And I said, okay, you know, we can work around that. We can figure something out. I said, what part do you want to play? And she said, all of them. Of course. Do I have to ask? And sure enough, you look at that special. She does all the parts of West Side Story, including the guys and the dances and the Anita and the Maria and Tony and the fight and the knife and she does them all. And she, you know, with makeup and hair, and she's terrific. I mean, just maybe 1 or 2 notes they had to bring in a Marnie Nixon to hit the right note, you know. But otherwise, she did the whole thing. It was Earl Brown, I think, the choral director, put that together. It's brilliant. The other number, which I wrote a thing for her, where she was a secretary, and it was a stream of consciousness, what she was thinking, and it was just voiceover thing, and I kind of liked that. And we did a thing in the Bradbury building downtown, that old, you know, very old wrought iron building, and she was going from office to office, and we set up different situations for her, and that was a great looking special, and she was terrific, you know. It was called Cher Special, and it was, you know.
Shirley MacLaine.
Shirley MacLaine. Which Shirley MacLaine would you like to hear about? Shirley. Did a number of specials with Shirley. Did her act, did her concert, did a lot of her appearances. Got a couple of Emmys because of Shirley. Also daring, very daring performer. Challenged. You love to challenge her. She loves the challenge. She'll take it on. She has a lot of depth. She has a lot of strange ideas, which she draws you into. And but when it comes to performing, terrific. And when it comes to acting, wrote a number of pieces for her that were very difficult to perform vocally and to grasp in length, where she would be different people uh, you never had to worry too much about her stretching because you knew she could do it. If she couldn't sing it, then she'd act it. If she couldn't act it, she would dance it, you know. And it was always quite remarkable, the end product. Always terrific performer. And the other side of the life with all the other lives and things, it's a wonderful springboard for jokes and material and stuff. And she needed something to be written for any occasion. I would use that as a springboard. So she was always a good, even recently I got a call, she wanted to do this charity event, and I did a special lyric on I Remember It Well with Hector Elizondo, and she did it just fine. So yeah, Shirley's good people.
Barbra Streisand.
That's Shirley to the nth degree. Streisand. I met Streisand 49 years ago, 50 years ago, 49 years ago. It was the year I got married. We were living in New York. I was given a chance by my agent to meet this singer who was working at a club called the Bonsoir. And the club was in Manhattan. And I said, when is this? He said, Tuesday. I said, Tuesday night? He said, yeah. He said, why? I said, because I'm getting married on Tuesday. He said, well, when are you getting married? I said, well, 6 o'clock. He said, well, you can make the 10 o'clock show. I said, are you serious? He said, yes, it's the only time she wants to meet with you, and she's looking for material. It's a great opportunity. So we got married in an unfinished hall in Far Rockaway, which is probably underwater now. 13 people sat down to dinner. They gave me a choice between a rabbi with an accent or a rabbi with a beard, and I took the accent, and he was talking in English, and I thought he was talking in Hebrew, and they thought I was making fun of him. Anyway, we get in the car and we drive back to Manhattan after my wedding. Billy, my partner, myself, Rhea, my wife, my new wife, and we go see Barbra Streisand at the Bonsoir. And we talk back outside there, and so we got some material we'd like to. She says, I'd like to hear it. Fine. And then I went and spent my one-night honeymoon at the St. Moritz Hotel, which my agent paid for. That was nice. And so I can say with all honesty, and I do quite often, especially to her, I spent my wedding night with Barbra Streisand. Her husband isn't too thrilled when he hears that, but that's what happened. Worked with Barbra a number of times after that. I mean, we saw her right at the beginning when we were there when she made that first album at the club. We were there for the recording. She used to play the upstairs at the duplex. My friend Louise Lasser, who was Mary Hartman, who I used to play for, was her understudy on I Can Get It For You Wholesale. So there was a lot of connections there. Wrote a pilot, a sitcom for her company when she was married to Elliot Gould. That summer when we were out at West Hampton, he came by in the rolls to pick up the script, as I recall. Lovely gentleman, softest handshake you can imagine. So anyway, over the years, I worked with Barbra many times on many events, many award shows, concerts, presidential inaugural. I worked with her on the Clinton one. And I would always write, if she's looking for a joke, I would write 10 jokes. 10 jokes. So that it would literally save me the trouble later to write 10 jokes for Barbra, knowing which one I liked And I would say, here's 10. Which one do you like? And she says, well, all right, you got it. And that's it. It would save me time where if I handed them in one by one, I'd be writing 30 jokes till she found the one she liked. So that's how she would work. She was a perfectionist to the nth degree. Oh, I mean, to the point of obsession, but, you know, that's how she worked. That's how she works. That's how she lives. And you can't argue with the results, you know. She's remarkable. She's unique. She's one of a kind. And through it all, over the 50 years since our marriage, it's been mostly a rewarding. I did a show with her, the 30th anniversary of the State of Israel, at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. And we had some of the biggest names you can imagine, but she was going to close the show. Going to do 20 minutes with Zubin Mehta and the LA Philharmonic. And that was the close. We had Barry Manilow. We had so many big names. We had Henry Fonda. We had Henry Winkler. We had Baryshnikov. We had all these people for that show. And Barbara was going to have a conversation with Golda Meir in Israel. And I wrote the conversation, except that they couldn't time it right for some reason, so they had to do. We taped Golda's answers before Barbara was asking the questions. So if you watch that show, you'll see her back is to the audience and she's talking to Golda on the screen, but everything is timed out as if it happened, simultaneously. So the interesting thing about she was brilliant, of course, but she didn't know she wanted to sing Hatikva, which is the national anthem of Israel. And she didn't know it, even with her Jewish background. And I had a meeting at her house with Zubin and myself and Barbara, and she said, I want to sing Hatikva, but I don't know it. I don't really know it. So I said, all right, hold on just a minute. I go to the phone and I call my wife. And I said, Ria, I got somebody here who wants you to sing Hatikva for her so she can learn it and hear it. And she says, who is it? I said, it's Barbara Streisand. She says, oh, I don't want to intimidate her. I said, it's okay. And sure enough, she got on the phone with Barbara and sang Hatikva. Barbara learned it from that. She recorded it, learned it from that, did it that night. Beautiful, just beautiful. I mean, it's on YouTube. You can play it from that concert that night. And she did it, perfectly. But the interesting thing, just at this time, Barbara, it was a long-standing thing, but she was really afraid of appearing in public. She didn't want to do concerts. She didn't want to. And I said, why are you, what's the problem? She says, look, in all humility and all honesty, she said, I am probably the biggest Jew in the world right now. She said, and if anybody wanted to make the headlines of any paper, all they have to do is take a shot at me. And that's why I'm really fearful of appearing. Well, she agreed to do it because it was Israel, it was Golda, it was Zubin, it was all those things. We had to back up her, the bus right up to the loading dock, so she didn't even have to walk out of the thing. She could go right from the thing to the loading dock to the stage, to the backstage, and come on from there. Security, like you wouldn't believe. We had all the metal detectors for all the audience and everything. She comes on for her thing and introduce her, ladies and gentlemen, Barbara Streisand. She comes in from the wings, and a voice from the balcony hollers out something. and you can see a look of terror on her face. But the huge applause and everything, and she comes and she does the thing. And I found out later that the person up there, a big fan, hollered, "We love you, Barbara!" And Barbara heard, "We're going to kill you, Barbara!" And that's that look of terror, because the worst fears were coming true in her mind, you know. But she did People, and she did Hatikva, and she did, you know, she was wonderful, of course, and brought down the house and walks off with Zubin at the end, but she throws her little shawl over her shoulder. And it's a gorgeous show. And like I say, some of that is still on YouTube. It's worth calling it up if you want to see Babs. And that's pretty much that story.
You also worked with Doug Henning.
Yes, I did. Doug was a charming young fella who was completely under the spell of the Maharishi. So much so that he actually supported a college in a Midwestern state, or in another state, the institute, you know, the Maharishi Institute. And he studied, you know, with the Maharishi. And Doug was really what you saw on the screen, with this belief, you know, he was like wonder. Everything was wonder with him. And he really believed it. I'd done, I think, 3 specials with him, 3 or 4. And on the one, we used to hear Walter Miller was the director. And Walter has a caustic nature and a ironic side to his vocabulary and his observations on life. And Walter used to go to the rehearsals, and you know, you got to be very careful when you're working with a magician that you don't reveal the illusions, you know. And Doug had some enormous illusions, you know, and they were elephants and things disappearing, walls and houses. And anyway, he would go off in this other room with his little group, and you could hear banging in there. And we never knew what was going on. And Walter says, "You know what they're doing in there?" I said, "What are they doing?" He says, "Well, I call them the flying assholes." He says, "They're really trying to levitate." He says, "and that's what the banging is. They get up off the ground and they bang and they fall down. They haven't perfected it yet." I said, "Okay." So anyway, that's what they were doing in there. Doug really believes that he could legitimately levitate him by the mind, not a trick. So that was his orientation. And he had my daughter on. It was so sweet of him. He had my daughter on one time when Genji was about 5, I guess. And he picked her out of the audience to do the famous ring trick, which, you know, the rings connect and they separate and all, and there are like 6 of them and they all come into her. And he's dealing with her. And she is so amazed and wide-eyed. It's where she hasn't been that wide-eyed since then. She's the last of the skeptics these days. But anyway, I have that piece of footage. It's just wonderful to have. But Doug was very, very sincere, very creative. His illusions were always wonderful, and he was almost sprite-like in his quality. Like Doug very much.
You did a piece in 1977, Bing Crosby's Merry Old Christmas, which has kind of become a classic.
Yes.
With David Bowie.
Yeah. That was the last show, Christmas show. That was the last show Bing did, actually. We did it in England. It was, again, Dwight Hemian and Gary Smith. and it's a beautiful, beautiful show. We use mostly English performers. Ron Moody, who was in Oliver, and Stanley Baxter, who was an English actor, and we had a group. No, we had David Bowie was a guest, and we had arranged for David to sing Little Drummer Boy with Bing. We had a little plot line going that Bing brought the family over to England, and they were staying in the house of Sir Percival Crosby, who was a relative, and Bowie lived down the street, and he wanted to use the piano. And it was a little ersatz dialogue going back and forth, but eventually they were supposed to sing Little Drummer Boy. And David came in to rehearsal, and he said, "Oh, I don't like that song. Really? I don't want to do that." And we had the arrangement all done, and Bing learned it, and the orchestra had pre-recorded it and everything, and Ian Fraser was the music director, and Larry Grossman and I were doing the music and lyrics, and he said, "I really don't want to do that number. It doesn't show off my range." So we were shooting it that afternoon, so we went down to a little room off the studio with a piano, and Ian and Larry and I said, "Let's try and preserve the arrangement of Little Drummer Boy. We'll write a counter melody to it, and we'll call it Peace on Earth." So we wrote that in like 20 minutes, and we went back upstairs and played it for David. He says, "Yeah, I can do that." So that was the genesis of Peace on Earth, Little Drummer Boy. And he did it, and he recorded it, and Bing passed away like 2 months later, even before the show was on the air. We shot it in the summer. And it was nice, and it was fine. The show was lovely. Oh, Twiggy was on the show. She was wonderful, too. She sang with the whole Dickensian thing. And beautiful show. And sure enough, show was done and fine, and Bing was gone, and everything was all over. We get a call a number of years later from this record company, and they said, we're producing weird combinations of performers for a Christmas album, and we'd like to do the David Bowie Bing Crosby duet. Little Drummer Boy and Peace on Earth. Okay, so you're entirely welcome. So they put it on this album called Now That's What I Call Christmas. And they used to put out an album every year called Now That's What I Call Music that used to sell, 2 million copies. It was the hits of all that year on one particular CD. And they put it out on that. And so all of a sudden it became not a joke, but a serious duet. And people loved it, and other people started recording it, and some people made fun of it. And this past year, they did a cartoon of it with Jack Black and Jason Segel, and then a couple of other people did a note for note, word for word version of the thing with Bing. And at the end, he knocks over the Christmas tree, and they have a fight and everything. But it had a whole life of its own beyond that, and people have done it. I've got recordings of the boys' choir of Vienna, and all kinds of different people in different languages. They raise money for charity. 2 disc jockeys in England raise money for a children's charity, recording it, and it's just become a standard, actually. Fortuitous again. Who knew? We even did Nightline. Ian, Larry, and I did Nightline this past year, telling the story of how it all came about.
Stop there to change the tape.